Pretty good. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thanks so much for taking the time.
Oh, sure, no problem.
I've spoken with Ron Murtaugh, and I've spoken with Judge Hanson as the president-elect of the Omaha Bar Association. But I really wanted to get your take on um, how it all worked to get through this last year in your job as chief judge, and some of the things that you thought were worth letting letting the lawyers know and the bar.
Yes. So, as much as I would like to forget about last year, um, we really had a lot of lessons that we needed to learn with regard to how the courts could operate in such an emergency. And so everything started to really start picking up early March. We started having meetings with Director Myers because his main concern was his inmates that were at the Douglas County Courthouse. And so he had a lot of foresight into what he thought he needed to get done and how we can continue to rotate his inmates. So he really was the one that got us really thinking about this is going to be a problem and we need to do something. So I had been out of town for a family emergency. I came back on the 9th of March. By Wednesday, we had meetings with all the stakeholders. Dr. Poor also attended, that we needed to take this thing seriously. And so, of course, Ron Murtaugh was heavily involved in getting the WebEx and computer aspects and things like that going. We had some of the judges got together, tried to figure out, how we can jam in custody inmates in hearings that, like pleas and in addition to the things that we're statutorily required to do. And so I had to issue an order so that we could communicate this to the bar, as well as, we had a lot of communication with Lincoln, because whatever we were doing, we had to make sure we weren't doing something overstepping anything. So the following week, as you know, probably that a county attorney was positive. He had been on some trip to for training for, I think he's in the National Guard or something. He exposed 3 floors, several staff members in the district court, judges in the district court, public defenders, and then panic just blew up. It's like, I'm not the smartest person in the world, but I know that if you panic, you're not going to get anything accomplished. Your reasoning isn't going to be smart. And so the county attorney's office closed for cleaning, we thought, for the weekend. Turned out it was for like 2 months. The public defender's office closed because they did it for cleaning, but they had an emergency plan probably before we even did, because the Supreme Court made all the counties enter into these emergency plans where we're going to continue court services that we must constitutionally continue, statutorily continue at half staff, so that we lessen the spread by having fewer people around, fewer movement through the building, that kind of thing. So all this stuff was happening like so fast and rapid fire, and it was absolutely, you just had to be aware. And plus, you had all these news things coming out in Europe. They have caravans of bodies in these army trucks going to crematoriums. You have Dr. Fauci telling you that 100,000 to 240,000 people are going to die in a week. And so, yeah, we had to make decisions really fast. So Ron was really instrumental in getting the jail, the equipment we needed, the stakeholders that had to be there to set it up. We had to run a test. That was the first thing, because people who come into the jail have a right to be heard within 48 hours. And so that was one of the first things. And we had to figure out, with the county attorney's office closed, the public defender's office, the city attorney was still, or the city prosecutor was still working and trying to figure out their emergency plans. And so it was just constant meetings, constant, what do we do? So a decision was made, and Lincoln told us that it was okay to continue all the arraignments, small claims, probate matters. And so our staff, by making that decision, we had to understand what that impact had on our staff, because you're talking in county court in Douglas County, thousands of cases.
Right. Right.
In addition to that, you have to make sure that, especially criminal matters, that they got proper service. So when we implemented our emergency plan, we made sure that half our staff was here in case people showed up. We made sure that there were at least 6 judges here at all times, so that if we needed to have a courtroom, well, the arraignment courtroom stayed open, the trial courtrooms closed, but we always had judges here to cover those courtrooms just in case. Preliminary hearings couldn't go forward, so those were all continued because the county attorney's office was closed. And so once April 1st hit, well, first of all, from March 16th to the 31st of March, we got all that accomplished. And if it wasn't for our staff, there was absolutely no way that we could do that. Not to mention all the stakeholders and the cooperation and the communication. So it was quite a crazy time. And then, you know, people did show up. The city prosecutor implemented forms that and a process to where people could plea at the window for fines. And I think that the officers were, when they'd write a ticket, they were setting them out 60 to 90 days so that we could lessen the spread by having fewer people. Anyway, once March 31st hit, that gave all of us some time to kind of take a breather and, you know, figure out going forward with all the news coming out with the health directives and all the just madness. For the staff, the most important thing for me and Ron and the other judges was to make sure that they didn't panic, because none of us knew how this virus would impact us. And so, you know, the essential personnel were all the managers for each division. And we just had to be here, including Ron Murtaugh and myself. And, you know, it went pretty smoothly. And then, you know, we only closed limited access to the building for the month of April. And so we had to figure out how we're going to start back up again coming, you know, March or May 4th, you know, with the protocols and guidance from the health department, as well as the Supreme Court and everybody else involved. And as you know, the evictions continued, as well as garnishment hearings. We got a lot of flack for that, but statutorily, our hands were tied. You know, there's nothing we could do. But I did kind of stick out a little bit, stick my neck out, and I just continued a bunch of those also, and then allowed the civil attorneys, if there's a restitution during this period where I continued them, that did not fall into the perimeters of the governor's order, what we could do with restitutions, then you can ask for a hearing and we'll move it up. And so that helped a little bit, but you know, it was quite the couple months in 2020. The staff was tremendous. They were so professional, you know, to alleviate the panic. I would just, you know, tell them, look, if you're pulling a weed, you pick one weed at a time. Don't look at the whole patch. Do what you can today. Don't worry about yesterday. Don't worry about tomorrow. Just do what we can today, because there was really nothing else we could do. And they were tremendous. Their poise, their teamwork, their professionalism, almost silent confidence and competence was tremendous. And we couldn't have done anything without them.
Oh,
Um, when we finally came back to full staff in May, they were so grateful to get back to work. They didn't like 1 week off, 1 week on. Um, and then when we slowed down in November, because we went to limited access again, November, December, January, February, they couldn't wait to get back to work. And we're starting to pick up. We're pretty much back to normal. So
and your time as chief judge for county court, was that on the calendar year? Was that January through December?
yes,
Okay. Okay.
right. So actually, I was also presiding judge in 2019. So we in Douglas County Court have 2 years on. If we can, it's really a yearly thing, but in county court, we've always kind of agreed that 2 years would be more consistent for, you know, thank goodness for something like this that happened.
Well, right.
We don't
You
have
had the
any-
ability, you had the institutional knowledge and the and understanding to really get going right away because of your year before, right?
Yes, that did actually help. But I relied heavily on the previous presiding judge, which was Judge Kime. Um, and you just have to learn it real quick if you don't have it. What was also really, when I look back, what was really tremendous is that how well the communication and the cooperation with all the stakeholders, like the jail, Director Myers, the county attorney, the public defender, the building commission, um, the city prosecutor, how we were able, and also the district court too, because like our juries are tied to their juries. And so, we had to be in constant communication so that we were kind of doing the same thing, but you really truly can't because district court is a different animal than us. And so once we got started back, of course, there was always hiccups here and there, and we just dealt with them the best we could. And I don't know, I think it worked out, even though, the press was kind of critical. First, they were critical that we had just masses amount of people, which we did.
Right.
We were just, you can't continue things that are like the next day, even the next week. And we just had to ignore that and just focus on what we had to do to keep people safe, to comply with our constitution and statutory duties, and to alleviate panic. There was so much panic around. Once that county attorney became positive and potentially spread in the courthouse, that was the turning factor of we just had to roll up our sleeves and get moving.
And I think
So,
that's the great thing about county court is that the volume that you deal with kind of it hardens that mindset that we got to keep moving forward. There's no other way. We cannot stop this because it'll
right.
just keep piling up. So that sort of doer mentality really helped move things along to where they needed to be.
Well, so Dave, when we first came back in May, we followed the guidelines for the health department as best we could. Because we limited the amount of people we'd have in courtrooms, but as you know, there's so many cases that come through our courtrooms. Knowing that we couldn't guarantee 6 feet apart, we marked seats. People complied, some did, some didn't. But what I thought was really good is, people have their different views on what masks will do. But I figured that at least if we couldn't do the 6 feet, if we had masks on, at least we're attempting to lessen the spread based on what the health department was telling us at that time. And it got to the point, well, and then the building commission put up those signs requesting people to wear masks. It was never mandatory throughout the building. And we, as judges, couldn't require staff to wear masks, but highly encouraged it. And, when there started to be some positives go out throughout the division, that everybody just voluntarily wore their mask when they got up and moved around. So um, not everybody liked it, but I don't know what else we could have done. And I think we've contained it pretty well. Um, and we had a backlog of preliminary hearings of 200 that we had to move forward on. And we just had to, at least the ones for defendants that were incarcerated. We got some pushback from that, but we stood firm. You have to give these defendants their day in court. One of the problems with criminal defendants, as you probably know, is that WebEx and Zoom for criminal hearings just doesn't fly with the defense bar. And because number one, you're not confronting your witnesses. And, when you have face-to-face, you have the ability to determine certain things with verbal and nonverbal communication. So they were adamant that those the suppression motions, trials, things like that were not going to be taking place on video conferencing.
Right.
Oh,
And I had that conversation last week with Judge Wheelock. I actually watched a sentencing via WebEx in his
right.
courtroom. And then I talked to a private defense bar attorney. He said I would never have let that happen via WebEx.
Nope.
I would have been there in person. If he's sentencing my client to years in prison, he needs to look them in the eye. That's for the client's benefit. That's for the judge's benefit. Everybody.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It is. We're going to continue what we have in place for WebEx for arraignments for the jail, because obviously this is not completely over. Normally we would go down physically to the jail, and I really miss that because there's a certain level of more control of a defendant. It's good for the defendant to see the judge face to face rather than on a screen. But it's worked out for what we have to deal with at this time. So I can't wait to get down to person down at the jail. Now they're saying we don't have to worry about surfaces. That was a huge problem in the beginning. So everybody was hand sanitizing, washing everything down, spray in the air.
Hundreds of gallons of sanitizer later, they're telling us it's not nearly as important as we thought, right?
All that money down the tube.
I guess the flu level went down. Maybe that's
next to nothing. Yeah, so that's good. So is there any other questions? I think I covered. The most important thing is that really we couldn't have done it without staff. And when you think about lessening the spread, you're not just worried about the community, your customers, the lawyers and all the others, but you're worried about your staff. And none of us knew who had an underlying condition and what this virus would do to them. And we have employees that have underlying health conditions and they refuse to go home. They wanted to stay and work. We just like, okay, you make sure your doctor approves that, that kind of thing. So, but they were tremendous. And I know this award is for them. It was a huge teamwork effort all the way around. So I'm just, at least we have knowledge now if something like that happens again, what we need to do. And it'll be a lot easier than if there is a next time. Hopefully there will not be.